Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of She Explores. I'm your host, Hannah Vogel. For this episode, we tried something totally new that I've never done before. We're going skeet shooting. So we met up with some family friends and a firearm instructor to take us out and show us the ropes. Let's check it out. Today, we're in Fenton, Michigan at the Grand Blanc Huntsman's Club. They offer a wide variety of shooting activities and facilities, but today, we're skeet shooting. We traveled with Bill Seavey and his son Jacob, who both have lots of experience. We sat down with them to learn more about the basics of the skeet game.
Basically, you have a high house and a low house and 8 stations. And at stations 1 and 2 and 6 and 7, you're going to shoot a high house and then a low house, single, and then you're going to shoot a double.
In skeet shooting, there are 8 stations, each positioned in a semicircle. Near the first and last stations are the high house and low house. The houses refer to where the clay targets are ejected, and the high house is elevated about 10 feet higher than the low house. Nowadays, these are operated by automated machinery. When the shooter yells pull, a clay disc is ejected by a machine and it sails through the air. The goal, of course, is to hit the disc before it's out of range. Well, it seems like a decent size up close. Yeah. But then it's in the air, and I don't know, I guess we'll see. In addition to Bill and Jacob, we met with NRA certified firearms instructor Len Smith to learn more about the history of the game as well.
Okay, the game itself started back in the early 30s, back on the East Coast. By a gentleman who was trying to come up with a clay target game that simulated hunting a little bit more. So they developed this game to simulate more outdoor bird hunting. So they actually had a contest in one of the national shooting magazines as to what they were going to name this new game. And a lady in Minnesota won the contest with the name skeet, which is Scandinavian for shoot.
Skeet is always played using a shotgun. There are several different types that we were introduced to.
It can be any gauge. Starting out, a good gauge is a 20 gauge for, especially for kids. A youth gun for smaller framed or younger kids. I mean, we have kids that are 9 to 10 years old that start, and they usually, depending on their frame, will shoot a 20 gauge or 28 gauge for the recoil and just the weight of the gun.
Eventually, for me, we settled on a 28 gauge Remington that fit me well. But before we went out, Len also spoke with us about firearm safety.
First is always be aware of where the muzzle of the gun is pointing. Number 2, we always keep the guns unloaded until we're at a station on the skeet field and ready to shoot. We don't put our finger on the trigger until we're ready to call for the bird and do the actual shooting. The 4th item is always be aware of your target and what's beyond. Well, we have different types of gun actions. There's the over and under and the pump gun and the semi-automatic and a side-by-side. The most popular guns are either over and unders or semi-automatics. What's more important is that having a proper firearm, no matter what action it is, that fits the shooter. That's the tricky part. I usually encourage people to start with a small semi-automatic, like a 28 gauge or a 20 gauge, and with shells that are loaded on the soft side, so they don't feel a lot of recoil, so they can enjoy the game.
Since I'm a beginner, I practice at stations 1 and 8, which are the easiest. I shot my entire round from those positions in order to keep it simple.
Lean back. There you go.
Skeet can be challenging, but the excitement of hitting your first clay pigeon is special. I had never done anything like it before. During my first round, I only hit 5 targets, but I was pretty satisfied since my goal was just to hit at least 1.
You got it. You broke it right.
You broke it in 3 pieces.
Yeah.
It is awesome! This is so much fun! Pull.
3 in a row.
At the end of the day, I had an amazing time and both rounds were successful.
Skeet is very social, especially during practice, not so much in competitions. In practice, it's very social. People talk and socialize. Well, it's still those proud father moments. I mean, it's just him graduating was, there's no more going and watching him shoot. Those are the sad times because those are gone. But, you know, now it's him and I just got to try and beat him.
My relationship with my dad completely revolves around hunting, fishing, and being outside. Building a relationship with him through that is just an awesome thing.
Being outside, as well as learning more about the game and firearms, made it well worth it. Not to mention, Bill was completely right about the socialization. The people you're with makes all the difference. I was glad to try something new, and after enjoying it so much, I might just be back again soon.
There's proper form and technique to it that is physical, but at the end of the day, it's you against yourself, not you against a bird.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of She Explores. I'd like to extend a huge thank you and shout out to the Seavey family for hosting and teaching us this weekend, as well as the Grand Blanc Huntsman's Club. That concludes this episode, but be on the lookout to see where She Explores next.